And in cooking school, they teach you cannot waste anything. That's all margin down the drain. And I'm teaching this class and I'm looking around and the garbage bowls are filled to the brim. And I'm like, we teach chefs to not waste anything, but we don't teach each other, like home cooks, to not waste anything. I'm sure if you're listening to this and you have a grandparent that went through the Great Depression, they waste nothing. Our generation missed that. And so I went on a mission to basically wake people up and say, you're throwing away so much food. So I started digging into the analytics. So here's some of the crazy stuff. You ready, Ben? In America today, we throw away 40% of the food that we produce.
Welcome to Climate Papa. This is a show about climate change, technology, and parenthood.
Welcome to episode 22 of Climate Papa, a show about the intersection of climate change, parenthood, and technology. And I'm your host, Ben Idelson. I'm based in Seattle, and I invest in climate companies with my fund Step Change. And I'm also a papa to 3 kids, a 6.5-year-old girl, an almost 4-year-old boy, and a 7-month-old boy. On the show, we talk about the many ways that people and businesses can make infrastructure changes that from that point onwards have a clear positive climate impact, as well as usually being just an upgrade to their life. This could be upgrading your HVAC to a heat pump or changing from a gas car to an EV. But food and what we eat is on the other end of the spectrum. It's the ultimate behavioral change and system challenge. The average person has 3 meals a day or 21 meals a week. That's over 1,000 each year. So that choice you might make about what type of car to drive that lasts 5 years is instead 5,000 individual meal decisions you need to make. And each of these meals and how we prepare them has a major impact both on our own health and the health of the planet. So in this episode, I sit down with my friend Joel Gamoran, a fellow papa, a chef, a culinary teacher, and the founder of Homemade Cooking. Joel's journey has taken him from teaching cooking classes and becoming the head chef at Sur La Table to hosting the cooking show Scraps, where he turned food waste into culinary masterpieces. Joel and I discuss staggering truths about the waste in our food system and how culinary medicine is a key unlock for our health, our communities, and the planet. Joel generously opens up about his own health journey and how that connects to his life's work. We explore how cooking can be a force for connection. And as you get to know Joel over this next hour, you'll quickly sense how special he is at connecting. Welcome, Joel.
I'm Joel Gamoran. I'm a father to a 5-year-old boy and a 3-year-old boy, and I have an amazing partner, Angelina. We live in Seattle, Washington. I'm a chef that is also on TV. I teach cooking for a living, and I own a company called Homemade, which teaches free interactive cooking classes. And I'm here to inspire you to cook more because I think it will better your life.
All right, Joel.
Ben?
Very excited for this. This is fun to have you in a little makeshift home studio. Next time we'll do it at the proper.
This is the
proper home.
This is the way I want to do it. Yeah.
The couch conversation.
Yes.
I'm gonna lean back and get more cozy. Speaking of which, what's going on? What's going on with the kids?
They're awesome, as you know. And the 5-year-old is like taking a turn of just like a little bit of tude, but like the right amount, and I'm loving it.
It's like a respectable amount. You're into it. It's a little,
I think
so.
A
little sassy.
A little sass, and I kind of love that he's like throwing it back at me. And number 3 is just a cuddle bear, but like every once in a while a grenade. So you just don't know if you're cuddling, a mine, like something that's about to explode. So, every day is on our toes at our house, but we're having so much fun. Everything is broken. Everything's soaked in urine, and it's great.
What is like the two of them dynamic wise?
Their dynamic is really what I'm learning is, and Ben, I don't know if you feel like this with your kiddos, but like I see this common thread with like firsts and seconds. And again, that's all I have, so I think about. But like first is so measured, so reserved, so respectful, sweet. Second is so brave, so crazy, and like just goes out on the limb. And like they fight so much, and everyone's like, well, who instigates? I'm like, number 2. Not even close. Is that how your kiddos are or not really?
For some reason, I think that's the general trend.
Yes.
I think we maybe have the exception to the trend.
Really?
Our eldest, she's coming up on 7, And she's just like a little bit more like
Like
cool. I hear that's the rule. That's a suggestion, right? Like like you're suggesting that I go downstairs and put on my shoes.
Yes.
Whereas the little one, I mean, actually at nighttime is when it really shows. The older one, she comes out and the whole house, you're just like, boom, 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 boom. You know, I can't get comfortable. I can't get comfortable. And
She
you like
says
hear the
that. I
whole,
love
whatever
that.
it is, I can't go to sleep. And the little one, this happened last night. So, sorry, the middle one.
Middle one.
Yeah. Now we have the little
7
one.
months in, Ben. Let's
I know,
go.
let's go.
Yeah. We got another one.
The middle one is almost 4. He tiptoes. Like he could be a ninja. He just like tiptoes silently out. He came out. He's like, Papa, are you going to come say goodnight to me? And he can whisper like phenomenally well. And so I don't know. I
have a theory
It's
now.
not even a boy-girl thing. Like it's
No,
flipped from
I
the
have a
expectation.
theory now. I want to see if it checks out with you because now I have a theory. My theory is that the second looks at the first and is the opposite.
That holds up. That holds
They're
up.
like, I'm going to carve my own lane.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if your oldest is playing this card of like, she's
Yeah.
going to hold the line.
Yep.
Number 2 is like, I'll be the opposite of that. So I
Yeah.
get my attention and
Yeah.
I carve my lane. And so maybe that's the thing.
that holds up and matches what I've seen in my lineup in my family as
Did we
well.
just
There's, like,
discover that on Climate
we just
Papa? Right?
discovered
Does that like, does there research that needs to go into that? I think we just nailed that.
I think there's a book to publish. So what do we call it? The Flip? No, like what?
Yeah,
like, there's some catchy
yeah.
name. What
Flip.
would Malcolm Gladwell call this book?
Totally.
You know,
It's like the anti-mirror. Yeah, it's something like that.
the,
yeah.
the coin flip.
That's exactly right.
So what does that mean for our third? So he's 7 months.
I don't know. I think it's going to be the same. I think everyone needs to carve their niche.
Was the third like always just kind of a jokester and just like doesn't because like the parents are broken down.
Yeah.
Like my parents were a little broken down. Oh, hold on 1 second. Someone's at the door. Third guess.
It was just FedEx. More coffee.
A coffee subscription.
So Ben made me a cup of coffee, which, by the way, I, being a Jewish, anxious human, coffee for me is like a newer thing. And like I avoided it, all caffeine, because it made my anxiety jump. And so I really, really avoided it. And then having kids, someone's like, just taste it. Just give it a little. And now I get it. And so I'm a newbie to the coffee world. And so like coffee subscriptions, grinding, tamping, different machines, fascinating to me. I'm not a part of this culture. It's new.
And what changed? Is it not making you that same like anxious trigger, or are you getting decaf,
I think
or you just are tired?
I think I'm okay with the anxious trigger because the other side of it is I'm awake and alert and can actually get things done. So I think I'd rather have an anxiety attack but actually be productive than literally not be able to function.
That fits. Like in the 20s, I was just like an anxious Jew, and then as I
Exactly.
get into my late 30s, now I'm a tired anxious Jew.
That's right.
And
That's
so the
right.
caffeine becomes a little less optional.
Yeah. So I'm in. I do what's called microdosing. So like I just do like a half a cup or something like that.
All right. Well, we've now established that you're an expert in birth order.
Yes.
You've now conquered caffeine.
Not an expert in caffeine,
Okay.
but yes.
What do you do
What do I do professionally?
professionally?
Professional.
Let's just go straight into what you do, and then let's talk about how you got there.
Yeah, let's talk about
Or whatever way. Who's Joel? Who is Joel?
Who's Joel?
Who's Joel?
I think what I do professionally really ladders into where I've come from, and I think that I grew up in a family where my mom was an awesome cook, which I'm sure so many of us have, or a parent is a great cook, and oh my God, we would have the most amazing gatherings, and I didn't realize it at the time because I was a kid, but it was like what was magical was like the food was the glue, and I got nicknamed the glue in high school. As a human, love connecting people with one another. I was always the guy that was not in the popular group, but not in the nerd group, not in the theater group, not in the sports group, but kind of floated groups. And food to me just became this ultimate connector. And I saw it. I started to cook for my own prom. I didn't take her out to dinner. I cooked for her. And it just became this interest. It was same around the time that Food Network was coming about, like late 90s. And cookbooks became friends to me. You know, like people read sports books or had, pictures of their favorite, whatever, models or stars on the wall. Mine were chefs. Mine was food. I spent all night thinking about composing dishes and thinking about what kind of restaurant am I going to
This was in high school.
It's in high school.
Wow.
Yeah, and cooking for my friends, and a lot of the time leading that to food poisoning and them throwing up in my house, but they're like, great job. It was a little salty. So just blowing up the kitchen. And then my parents got divorced. And food stopped hitting the table. And you start realizing what it did for the family and for my life. And so I felt kind of like I had to double down on cooking. And so I started to get even more into cooking because when my mom wasn't cooking, I came from a family of 4. We were kind of dispersed. But when I put food on the table, we got back together. Again, it's very sticky. It's this glue. So that's what led to a passion for food. And I thought I wanted to be the next big chef. I started to cook in restaurants. I got really sad and depressed, and I didn't know why. And so food was half the equation, but there was another half.
It sounds like it was the glue function, which like if you're not gluing the people together
that's right.
directly.
Yes. But as
You're
a chef,
a hugger. I mean, you can't.
I'm a hugger.
You might not get that on I mean, some people might see some video clips of this. I don't know. But they're certainly not going to get a Joel
I'm very
Gamoran
squishy.
hug.
Yes.
You're glue.
I'm squishy.
Glue.
I'm a squishy glue. And that's right. And when you're in the back of a restaurant, which is also in the business called the back of the house.
Not a huggy place.
Not a huggy place. You don't get to interact with people. And so how do I have this food thing, but this huggy thing? So that led to a life in food media, which is what I do today. Yeah.
Amazing.
You want me to go into that?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's a lot to unpack that we just went through. I mean, I think few people, and I don't think I'm there with the clarity of that weave through of like something that was important to them in childhood.
Yeah.
And then the direct role that it played in giving you it sounds like some autonomy to bring that back.
Yeah.
In the time of challenge and like darkness.
But just think about it on any level. Like I went to college in
Yeah.
Connecticut, which is 3,000 miles away from my home. I grew up in Seattle. And I didn't know anyone. I was on purpose because it was during that divorce. I just wanted to get out. And we didn't have a kitchen in our dorm rooms. And I was so bummed and I was so sad. And, we had one communal kitchen in the whole dorm. Maybe 4 levels. I'm sure there was 80 dorm rooms. One kitchen. Never used, obviously.
No
unless
one used it. Yeah,
maybe you're heating up a pita, a pocket or whatever, like a hot pocket. So I made challah one time, which half the kids in my dorm didn't know what that was. But if you don't know what that is, it's a Jewish bread we eat on Shabbat on a Friday night. And it just smelled the entire dorm. And it was instantly I was home. And I ate it, and I remember just feeling like it was a hug. It was so warm. And I'm 3,000 miles away from it. And people that I didn't even know were coming down. What is that smell? Do you want to try it? Whatever. So whether it's in despair, whether you're trying to meet with people, food connects us.
Yeah.
And I love being connected. We're connecting over coffee right now. So I love that. And I wanted to devote my life to that. And how whatever I do in my life has to include that aspect.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about kind of where you went from there. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds, I think way earlier than most, certainly way earlier than myself.
Yeah.
You knew like food was the central thing.
You didn't know early on, what did you know
that I'd
early
be a
on?
venture capitalist podcaster.
Yeah. You had to. I mean,
I did have an early iPod and enjoyed it. So I guess,
But Ben, I know you, and we've talked about this, but you did have some early premonitions about your abilities and your ability to take in information and your curiosity around business. You were doing the same thing.
I would say some of the foundational skills were there, but maybe what makes food in part so connective is there's a simplicity of the end satisfaction, that end state, the creation of it, to the hug, to the success of the thing. Now what you're doing now layers on complexity, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
But for me, it's the dots do connect, but you have to, there's a multiple dots you have to hop through to go from, I liked math and physics and engineering.
I was just about to ask, did you like to build growing up?
Yeah, a decent amount. Even more than that, I think take things apart, right? And understand how they work. That was something I often did with my dad, was take apart, build computers, take apart, he'd go to a garage sale, would often go together at the flea market, and we'd come back with an old stereo. They're like, oh, it's broken, so it's 50 cents. And he's like, great. We're going to buy this. We're going to take it apart. There's all these good parts in there that we can save for whatever, put them in the garage. But it's just that was a weekend,
That's so cool. I think that's so interesting. And I think about Legos when I think about cooking as well and building. And, you get a Lego box and there's a picture on the box and there's instructions to make that picture. And usually you make the picture, but after that, I don't know about you, I always destroyed it. And I'm like, what else can I make with these same blocks?
Yeah.
And I think building and cooking are kind of the same. It's like you have these blocks in cooking, it's ingredients, and it's like you can make the recipe, you can make the picture, or you can use them and make your own thing. And I love building too, not to that level. It's different. And I didn't have the patience. And
Yeah.
what's cool about cooking is it's the only thing I think that you build to destroy immediately. And it's so short lived. It's not a product that takes a ton of planning. To your point, we were just talking up in the kitchen. Sometimes it's good just to whip it up,
Yep.
but then instantly it's gone.
The
And
destruction is tasty.
I
The
love
tasty
that.
destruction.
I love that part of it. So I think we're both builders in
Yes.
some ways.
Yes.
You probably just have a lot more attention to detail and patience. And we probably saw that from an early age. But okay, so where did that lead? So I wanted to be a chef, went to restaurants, hated it, needed to find this marriage of both. So I did have a job outside of restaurants at a farmer's market in San Francisco where I was making smoked salmon sandwiches. And
Was the Ferry Market?
Yeah.
One?
Have you been
oh,
there?
yeah.
You've been
Yeah.
that one?
Yeah. Anna and I lived in San Francisco for 10 years. And I mean, that there's tourist attractions and whatever in the Ferry building and all this, but like the farmers market's great.
it doesn't feel touristy, does
No,
it?
no,
It feels
it's-
so like neighborhoody still, even though
right.
it is touristy.
That's right.
But it's a scene. I mean, if you've never been, it's a scene. It's like wall to wall traffic. The food, the ingredients are probably the best in the country. Like you're seeing citrus that you've never heard of. You're eating a tomato that you've never, ever had explode like that in your mouth. You're eating tamales that were rolled by someone. It's just on a different level in terms of a farmer's market. So I worked there. I just wanted to be close to the vendors as a chef. And they were like, we don't have any jobs, but there is one hippie that smokes salmon and you can make sandwiches. So I made smoked salmon sandwiches and became really close with this hippie. And this hippie ended up, her name is Sally. She became really my mentor. And I loved this job. This job was cooking. I was assembling sandwiches, but it flew by and it was so much more fun than the restaurant. And it wasn't back of the house. It was in front of the house. I was talking to people, seeing kids, seeing repeat customers, engaging. So it was a total just awakening for me. It's like, okay, people need to be half the equation and food need to be half the equation. And it was clear to me that I had to figure out a job that did that. So that's what led to a life of teaching to cook. And I realized it's not about the food for me. It's about getting people excited about the food for me. And hopefully if you're listening to this pod, you're getting excited about cooking. And that's my job. Like that's what I evangelize. It's just I want people to cook more because of what it did for me, because of what it did for the divorce of my family, because of what it did for me at college, what it continues to do for me. Food is medicine. Cooking is medicine. And that is my mission in life.
That's amazing. So why are you on Climate Papa?
So I had to find a job that married those two things. There's a company in here in Seattle that I'm sure some of your listeners have heard of called Sur La Table. And they have cooking schools in they're like Williams Sonoma. They're a cook shop. You buy pots and pans, but they had schools inside them. And
That's like a pretty innovative idea, right?
Isn't that a cool
yeah,
idea?
It's very cool.
Yeah,
Like
and it's so smart. Like Lululemon now has yoga classes. And they had cooking classes, and it from a business perspective, it's genius. I ended up teaching part-time. Then I could not love it any more than I did. I was begging for shifts. Begging. And to me, these were reps. And I couldn't believe people were paying to listen to me to teach them. I couldn't believe. People would walk in. I'd have like 3 customers. They paid money to hear me spiel. Unreal. So I did 10 years of this. I ended up becoming their head chef after 10 years, moved to New York, and I started to get really well-known people to come in my classes. And I got well-known as a chef instructor. And that led to some awesome opportunities, a TV show and a cookbook, and now I have another TV show. But what happened one night, and this is where it leads to Climate Papa, was I was teaching a class, and I went to culinary school, I did all that stuff, and in cooking school, they teach you cannot waste anything. That's all margin down the drain. And I'm teaching this class, and I'm looking around, and the garbage bowls are filled to the brim. And I'm like, we teach chefs to not waste anything, but we don't teach each other, like home cooks, to not waste anything. I'm sure if you're listening to this and you have a grandparent that went through the Great Depression, they waste nothing. Our generation missed that. I would love to dive into that with you, Ben, like the history of like the Industrial Revolution and like fast food, movie night dinners. Trash just became normal. And and so I went on a mission to basically wake people up and say, you're throwing away so much food. So I started digging into the analytics. So here's some of the crazy stuff. You ready, Ben? In America today, we throw away 40% of the food that we produce. So let's just talk about that for a sec. That means when you're driving on a road trip and you see like, a cornfield, almost half of that is just going to get trashed. Okay. At the same time, 1 out of 8 people in America go to bed hungry. So just fundamentally, we are throwing away half the food almost that we produce, and people are still going to bed hungry. What does that do? You care about the climate. Let's just pause there for a sec. Like, think about how powerful that is.
Yeah. It hits at multiple layers. Like as soon as you see that, I start seeing like the inputs and outputs before and after that. To grow that food, there's exceptions, but the vast majority of our food is grown with fertilizer inputs. And to create that fertilizer is an ammonia process called the Haber-Bosch process. And it's like a highly emittive process. And it's a very important thing. We probably would only have half the food on the planet if we didn't have fertilizer. And
I didn't realize that. That's crazy.
And so it's an essential process. And it's one of the most emittive things that we do is this process because it's an important one. It's not to say, hey, we should turn that off, but I think about that food waste as, first of all, what is all the emissions and effort and materials and water that went into growing, the strawberry, the corn, the tomato.
Yep. Or raising the cow or whatever it is.
Yep. The beef conversation.
We'll table that. We'll table that.
Yeah. The land use there is croplands and grazing lands cover 40% of the Earth's land surface. So around 40% of the land on Earth is now used to grow food in one way or another. Put that in perspective, all the cities and suburbs where people live cover less than 1%, right? So just from a land use perspective, this is also one of the big climate issues is if you look at agriculture, it's also the fact that that's not land where we can grow trees because we're busy growing, the blueberries or the corn or whatever, or most significantly grazing animals. And so those are all these inputs.
Yes.
Then when we say we throw it away,
yes.
Well, where does it go and what happens to it? Even in the US, the vast majority isn't going into organic compost.
No.
Which means it's getting buried underground in a landfill, which means it's turning mostly into methane emissions, which are very potent greenhouse gases.
Yep.
And so at a base level, there's all of that. There's also issues with nitrous oxide, which comes out as a byproduct of the fertilizer. So there's like a lot. Like I sit in this tension where it's like I think the modern agricultural system is amazing and has saved many lives. Like the fact like 1 in 8 is way too many, and it's much better than history. Used to be that the majority of humans would have food scarcity, right? It is because we figured out fertilizer, the industrial food system, that we can feed everyone, but we're still radically inefficient. So anyway, sorry, I'll stop my rant there.
I learned so much about what you that's incredible. I didn't know about the 40%, the 1%. All that is so interesting. And as a chef, I thought we were just wasting the food. And when you hear some stats like that, you're like, no, there's so much that's being wasted. And
chop down a tree to grow that food. And so we're not storing the carbon in the tree as a result of, so it's.
Let's break this down for a sec. Let's talk about the chain. And if you guys are listening to this podcast, you'd be willing to kind of go through this, but let's take one food bed and let's just follow it. Okay. And we can do this from the farm. We can do this from the ocean. We can take this however you want to do, but you come up with the food. What food should we follow through the chain?
Let's do a loaf of bread.
Whoa, a loaf of bread. Okay, I love that.
Because it feels like, it sounds so simple on the surface.
It totally does. All right, so classic. A loaf of bread, which we all love. I'm trying to avoid because I'm trying to lose some lbs, but we'll get that's a different time. So starts as wheat, right? A lot of things in the field, there is no place to sell it, so they just grow as much as they possibly can. So the waste starts in the field. Sometimes, not in the case of the wheat, but if you're growing peppers if they don't look right, or if their color is blemished, or the sun hit them at a wrong time, or they fell on the ground, or whatever. Even though it is so edible, there are rules in this country that do not allow farmers to sell those. So those become waste, even though they're edible and they are great. So that is the first place food does not hit. So this, in the case of wheat, if it looks wrong, if it didn't grow to a certain height, if it's too small, too big, it will not be ground into flour. Anything to add there? Kind of the first step?
No, I think that's right.
These are ridiculous. So the first issue is that we have these regulations on food here in America that are too tight, and in other countries they don't have this. They waste less. It's too crazy. So like everything having to be uniform. Now, why does everything have to be uniform? Let's go to the next step. Well, if everything is not uniform, if a pepper doesn't stack correctly, then you can't pack it correctly on the truck. And so it won't fit in the boxes. So if it won't fit in the boxes, that's the first reason why it can't go. So it gets wasted. It has to fit in the box. It has to look the way when we go to the grocery store, we shop with our eyes first. That's why you see huge stacks. You're like, how many avocados does this place need? It needs a lot. There's a lot of psychology around it looking bountiful, it looking huge. So that is a big reason. That avocado has to be a certain shape, a certain size, a certain spec, a certain acidity, a certain everything. And when you go to other markets in other places of the world, you see small avocados, big avocados. You know, and I know we're doing wheat, but my point is like it looks different. So now we're at the grocery store, and everything looks the same. And it looks the same because it's got to fit on the shelves. And then what happens at the grocery store? We all know this. At midnight, at every grocery store, they got to go through, and they got to start picking. Oh man, this piece of bread is past its due. I'm not following the bread at all, but you get the idea.
New peppers.
Yeah, we're going peppers, avocado. But they'll go to the bread and they'll say, "This is
avocado.
stale."
Let's make avocado toast.
Yeah, there you go.
With a little pepper on top.
There you go.
We'll do the whole thing.
Yeah. So they'll go through all this food. They'll go through the produce and they'll say, "This is overripe." They'll go through the bread and they'll say, "This is expired." They'll go through the milk and say, "This is past due." And they just start trashing. And if you go in the back, or if you've ever seen or YouTubed what the back of a grocery store looks like, you would be on this mission with Ben and I right now, because it's psychotic. Anything to add there, Ben?
Keep going.
So we're just going through the chain. So we're wasting in the field. We're wasting to get to the grocery store. We're wasting at the grocery store.
That's right.
And then finally you buy some food, right? And you take it home and you probably overbuy because it's not your fault, but this is how things happen. And then that piece of bread goes stale and you don't want to toast it anymore. And it's half the loaf and it's not your fault. You were traveling, you were working hard, and the bread went to bad. So it goes into the compost. And like Ben just said, you think compost is great. It's no problem. No, compost stacks on top of each other. It allows no oxygen to get in, and that piece of bread actually is really bad for the environment. So in every step of this chain, there's waste. And by the way, I think in most chains there are waste.
Yes.
So for me as a chef, I wanted to be like, where can I have the most impact? And for me, it was the last step. It's like, how do I empower people to look at that loaf of bread and see that stale piece of bread and say, that's not trash yet?
I mean, you probably didn't want to go hug the cold truck.
I did
You
not
wanted
want
to hug the person.
Yes, that's right. I wanted to connect, use as a chef, what can I do? So can we teach that person to make that bread into breadcrumbs? Can we make that bread? Now there's all these companies. I don't know if you've heard of these companies. There's one called Toast who makes beer out of stale bread, and they collect stale bread from all the restaurants and they ferment it instead of wheat.
That's great.
And so the answer is not only does not throwing away this food save the planet, it saves you money and it's unbelievable flavor. And there's so much opportunity. So that's the coolest part about this part, is that it's a win-win. It's great for the planet, great for your pocketbook, and awesome for flavor, culinary-wise, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I want to go back to the moment for you, when you're there at one of these cooking classes, when you saw all that, and kind of where did you go with it, right? Was it, hey, there's this knowledge inside the restaurant industry that just has never jumped?
Yes.
And so you're like, I already knew this because I've seen the restaurant industry and I was taught that.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can have it jump over.
Yeah. And if I'm going to say some terms to you, you tell me if you know these terms, okay? What does mise mean?
Mise?
Mise.
I don't know.
What does encroute mean?
I don't know.
Exactly. These are all restaurant terms that you would know if you went to culinary school or worked in restaurants. Restaurants speak a language, just like any business sector does, that doesn't reach the home cook. So my job was, how do I take these restaurant tips and how do I translate them for home cooks so that they can understand them? And so that's about recipes, that's about content. And that's why content became so important. This is a TV show is a phenomenal way to speak the language of the end consumer. Let's inspire them by telling a story around that. And that launched Scraps, which was my first TV show. And it's obviously, but if you can't tell by the name, all about saving the scraps of food. Yeah.
Amazing. So how long ago was this?
That was 7 years ago. It was on A&E Networks. I went to Food Network. I pitched this idea to every network in the history of I went to History Channel. I went literally Discovery, Nat Geo. I've sat in I had agents. You can't imagine. And everyone's reaction was, we are not going to produce a show that is about cooking garbage. That is a dumpster diving show. No one wants to see you cook stale bread, Joel. Sorry. And so I became friends with Katie Couric, long story short. She came to some of my classes. We became friends. And she got on board as an executive producer because she saw the issue, the 40% and the 1 out of 8. And she marched me in and got me on, the channel. So if it wasn't for Katie, there would not have been a Scraps. And I got to give A&E Networks, the credit for putting on a dumpster diving show. And it was an awesome show. I traveled in this little van called Pippi, and it's a VW van, and it was a piece of garbage. We found it in like a dump, and it represents the ingredients. It represents this idea that garbage can be something more. And so we went on a road trip from city to city, collecting what we would typically see as like local ingredients that would normally get thrown away. So we'd go to Charleston and get shrimp shells, and we'd cook that. We'd go to Montana and get trout bones, and we would cook a big feast for people and kind of turn them on to all this crazy stuff.
So it was like a travel, cooking,
yes,
food waste show.
Yeah.
I love it.
I can't believe it
wild.
Worked, but it does. It's a great show. You can watch it on Amazon now, and then that led to the cookbook, which is awesome. So food waste is just, it's not, I didn't create like this idea of cooking scrappy, waste-free cooking, but which, by the way, so in vogue right now. Go on Instagram. There's a million cookbooks like this. I am not the first. And Jacques Pepin, who's a very famous chef, wrote in my book, he's like, he's not inventing a new way to cook. He is showing you the right way to cook. And that is all this is like, we've been just cooking a little bit off. We've been wasteful. So this is just the right way to cook. You just got to be thoughtful about your ingredients and not be so quick to throw them out.
I mean, I think we're just in a weird moment in history that is unprecedented. And so it's not intuitive. I mean, so much about the food system, I think, plays with the fact that our brains are not wired to have infinite choice, piles of avocados in front of us. On one hand, food can sometimes seem expensive, but I believe Americans spend a lower percentage of their income on food than ever before.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I thought, okay, interesting.
So, I mean, because the industrial food system is efficient and it keeps getting more efficient.
Yeah.
And so that is, material abundance. And that's on one hand amazing. And I think, a way of progress. And on the other hand, I think we haven't yet figured out how to live with that. Right.
Yeah.
We haven't yet figured out, okay, that doesn't mean just because you should be so wasteful. It also doesn't mean that everyone has the material abundance. It's still not distributed. And it doesn't mean there's not a lot to learn from both, the past, whether that's our grandparents and great-grandparents and what they cooked and how they cooked, or from, what happens in restaurants that are really kind of thinking about this from a larger volume perspective. So they probably just feel and think differently about it.
Yeah.
So all of this,
it's a psychology.
Yeah. And we're going to look back at this.
We're not prepared for it.
We're going to look back at this period of time. It kind of reminds me of cars without seatbelts, right? There was a long stretch there where cars were going 60 miles an hour down the freeway and kids were sitting in the back with no seatbelts. And you look at the rates of death and they were wild. And it makes sense because you'd hit a car and kids and adults would fly through the windshield and die. Well, now you're like, yeah, your kid better be in a car seat or a seatbelt or a booster seat. And that's just what it must be because we've realized that's how it's not that natural for the human body to go 60 miles an hour and then stop. And it's also not that natural for us to have
towers of peppers and
every food
chips
from around the world
Yeah.
imported into Seattle at a scale that no one human could ever eat. We haven't really worked through it as a
I
society.
think you're so right, Ben. I think social media is like that too. I mean, not to go on a rant on that, but like, there's just like these things that are like trying to be regulated, but they're not regulated. And it's like, I'm so interested. You're right. In 50 years, are people going to be like, do you know what grocery stores used to be like? I mean,
That was insane.
Think
Yeah.
about 50 years ago. Like, I talked to my grandma. I did a report on what grocery stores used to be like when I was in college. This is how nerdy I am. And I called her. I'm like, where did you go grocery shopping? And she's like, the market. I go, what would you get at the market? She's like, oh, like pantry stuff. She's like, we didn't have like fresh meats. I go, well, then where did you get chicken? She goes, the chicken guy. Where'd you get milk? The milkman. Like, okay, it was just different, right? And like, it wasn't always in their face. And so 50 years ago, that seems crazy to me to have a milkman and a chicken man. And she knew the chicken man and blah, blah, blah. And like in 50 years, it's going to be 100% different. And I think you're right. It feels like grocery stores can sometimes be like a casino. Just today, I have this amazing partnership with Safeway, who is actually committed to food waste, which is so rare and cool. But I was shooting a video at a Safeway. I wasn't there to shop. I don't know the last time you went to a grocery store and you weren't there to shop. And I said to the video cameraman, I said, I feel like I just need to buy groceries. It's a casino.
Yeah,
it's like, I
it's
feel like I need
triggered
to bet.
Yeah,
It's built for us to feel this way.
of course.
These stacks and the labels and the lights and the way it's set up, it is built for us, and it's confusing. And I think this leads into kind of where we want to, also talk about, which is you said there's like, it's confusing and it's hard to kind of navigate. I would say that I have tried to navigate the best I can, but from a health standpoint, I've done a really poor job. So I'm overweight. I was pre-diabetic. I've lost 50 pounds over the past couple of years. But my relationship with food has been really hard. I lost my sister to food and drugs, which were kind of coincide, and you can think of food as a drug. But to your point of like, there's no seatbelts. That's the kind of, we've never been more obese as a culture. Diabetes, 1 out of 3 people are either pre-diabetic or have full-blown diabetes. We have more medicine, more research than ever before, more technology, yet we are sicker than ever before. We have more processed foods than ever before. We are eating more processed foods than ever before. So we are in this kind of crazy Wild West time. It doesn't feel like that to us because it's normal, but like, it's very hard to navigate. It's very hard. And by the way, as a chef, as someone who does culinary education, I want to just go out and say, and it's hard to navigate for me personally. I'm having a hard time navigating it.
What is our way through this?
What do you think? I'm curious. You're very good at solves and thinking of building and products and businesses around it. But what are your initial thoughts?
There's a real tension in my mind because I think that the food system, like everything else, exists in these different categories across society, right? There are people who can afford a home chef to come and produce the meal plan and dial all this in. And those same people might be, turning to medicine to dial all of this in and kind of like create this perfect thing. That might be personally interesting, but is actually not that interesting to me when I think about the system. And when I think about, society at large. And when I think of society at large, it feels like it's these bigger cultural currents. And I think that food is tricky because sometimes it is, that idyllic family meal at the table. Sometimes it is, I have 5 minutes on a lunch break and
Totally.
I need to just eat something and McDonald's happens to be there. And that's a real thing and it's
Yes.
cost effective.
Yes.
And I used to, I think, before I started actually doing more in climate and kind of studying food scarcity, I think I probably used to think, oh, well, we should just all eat the local, regenerative, organic thing from the farmer's market. And then I started to think about the price of that and started to think about the kind of convenience of that. And I think that's like a very limited way to look at, the scale that this whole system needs to operate at. And the fact that everyone needs bread, not just the $12 loaf of sourdough that's at the farmer's market. And so we need to, I think, take that as a real thing. And I don't know, I guess I've just become more interested in the more like large scale systemic changes. So I look at things like, I don't know, maybe expiration dates is an area where like you could actually have massive climate impact and economic impact and food scarcity impact if you had a different more intentional framework around expiration dates, right? That actually is like the type of thing that you play with, and you're like, oh wow, you could actually move the needle a lot if this had more nuance to it, right?
We're in an interesting time for that.
Tell me about it.
I mean, I want this episode to be evergreen, but we're sitting here right now with a new administration coming in. I don't want to personally get into politics, but it wasn't an administration that I was particularly supportive of. But RFK has gone on a rant around the FDA and about food as medicine and about how corrupt these things. And I don't know how much is true and how is not, but I will say we are about to go into a time where things are going to get shook up. And like when you talk about expiration dates, when you talk about what's passable from an FDA standpoint, I don't know if you know this, we both have kids. This is about Climate Papa. Do you know that potato chips and French fries count as a vegetable servings for our kids' school lunches?
It's absolutely ridiculous.
That's ridiculous. Yeah. So like, it's gotten out of hand, and it's like, you're right. Like, I wonder if some of these levers need to be pulled. And like, again, I'm not saying I'm like, spouting for RFK here, but like, I do think some things need to be shook up a little bit.
The system has not been working over the last few decades, and it's not, generally evolving. I mean, it's interesting. Like, I didn't track how it rippled through, but Michelle Obama did do a big focus on this at some point.
I think the core of what she was trying to get to is, and what I took away from it was, to me, this is like the center of it all, which is we as a society need to be eating more whole foods, real food. I'm just going to full stop there. Like, if you're listening to this podcast, if there's any actionable thing, if you eat more whole foods, your life will improve, and also the planet will improve. It's the ultra processed, anything that comes in a bag or has a nutrition label, those are becoming more and more. And as they become more and more in our lives, they're fast, they're convenient, they're salty, they're lab tested, they're everything. Ultra processed foods it's a drug, man. And it's an unregulated drug. And this is what Michelle was saying. She wanted to get away with ultra processed foods, and she wanted to get back to a place. And that's not realistic, but like, that is where I'm getting extremely interested, is that space of like, it's not getting back to our roots. I hate saying that, but we need to cook more. We need to eat more vegetables. We need to eat more whole grains. We need to eat food in the way that it was supposed to be eaten. And that will have a trickle-down effect, not only for our health, but for the climate. And they go together. They go together. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that lands. I think that makes sense. Yeah.
I'm not saying it's like the solve all.
No. I think these things are also not. I think one thing that's interesting about food is, unlike, I've had people on talking about heat pumps and talking about electric vehicles and things that are these one-time infrastructure decisions in your life, right? Yeah. And I like those solutions, because if you can convince a house to go from a gas furnace to a heat pump, you've done it and it's done. It's locked in, right? Food is the ultimate challenge because it's the opposite of that. It is, you're making those choices at the grocery store every single time you go, automatic, weekly, and then you're making choices daily, multiple times a day, what to put into your mouth, right? And put in your kids' lunches.
Totally.
And that makes it like a behavioral thing and a cultural thing and a societal thing. I think I've maybe referenced this in a past podcast episode around these types of changes, but you look at the data around which cities have the highest rates of plant-based diets. And you would think, oh, Seattle must be up there. It's a progressive city. Yeah. It's actually not that high up there. It's pretty like middle of the pack.
Really?
Turns out the primary relationship between plant-based diet and a city is, what is the percentage of the population that's Hindi?
Huh.
So if you want to track through large-scale kind of cultural changes, it's religious or cultural restriction and constraints on food that actually is very sticky. We come from Jewish tradition. I don't know what your food policy is. I don't keep kosher, but people that do will spend their whole life kosher. They'll spend their whole life never eating certain foods because they've been told that's their tradition. And that is kind of cultural infrastructure, right? So, not saying that we start a religion, Joel, but I'm not saying.
I'm putting what you're putting down. There's a cult that's being cooked up right now. I'm so blown away by what you just said, and I think it's so true. I've never looked at it through that lens of like, we've got 21 decisions, right? 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, that, to your point, are sometimes you have all the time in the world, sometimes you have no time in the world. And you're so right. It's like it has to be ingrained in you for those decisions to be automatic. Beyond religion, beyond culture, there is one more thing that I believe could change someone's, like, check it off, which is, this is going to get dark, which is death. And like, you go to the doctor and the doctor says you're going to have a heart attack if you don't change the way you eat. Guess what? They change the way they eat. Okay. So if you want to change behavior, tell them that they're not going to be here anymore. And I get it. You're right from a cultural standpoint, but like, you will change behavior if you have to change behavior. And the problem is doctors aren't nutritionists. They get no nutrition training. They don't know. They are literally, they get less than 8 hours out of 8 years. They don't know anything about cooking. So all they know is this is a pill that will help you. So we don't have a source of inspiration for people who have diabetes, who have cancer, who have all these. By the way, 60% of cancers are avoidable with lifestyle changes, exercise, and healthy eating. How many trillions of dollars have we put into cancer treatments? How many zeros of dollars have we put into teaching people with cancer how to cook? I'm on a mission with what I'm calling culinary medicine. It is medicine, but delivered not through a pill, through food, that I believe is untapped in this country and will actually move the dial from an environmental standpoint, and it will extend people's lives and better people's lives. We are totally overlooking it. And we are putting so much thought into the pill, the injection, the easy, quick fix, and almost zero thought. I went to the gastro doctor. He had no idea I was a chef, blah, 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 blah. He's like, you got to change. You got to eat more fiber. And I played dumb. What has fiber? He's like, oh, things like beans, cruciferous vegetables. I'm like, okay, cool. He's like, my receptionist will give you like the layout.
The printout.
The printout. Gave me a printout. It looked like it was from the library I grew up in 1994. I mean, it was like black and white. You could barely make out the picture. The grossest recipe. This is supposed
It was not
to
a
be,
cookbook.
It was, yeah.
It was not a recipe.
It's supposed to be what changes my behavior. Like, there's zero inspiration, zero reason for anyone to change their behavior. And so I think with all this in this system, we need, I don't know, man, we got to invest more in this. I think it's possible. I don't think you have to be Hindi. I think that you have to be, I definitely think there has to be a driver, but just that's like anything. Don't you think, or no? Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I do think so. I think that one of the consistent challenges with, I think, food and exercise is the narrative is always the personal. It reminds me a lot of kind of the general carbon footprint thing.
Yeah. Carbon
footprint, I don't know if you know this historically, it was actually the concept of a personal carbon footprint was created by an oil company.
No way.
Right? Because, hey, it's not the fact that we're pumping the oil out of the ground. It's the fact that you're not tracking your carbon footprint.
It's on you.
It's on you.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You could fly less. You don't have to drive a car, but please, right? Meanwhile, that's the society we live in, right? And so I think that I think about a person making a series of decisions, and it's like, if you have a gambling addiction and you live down the street from the casino, it's going to be very hard. If you have to go through the casino to get to work, it's going to be very hard to make it to work, right?
Yes.
And food is so challenging because I don't know if you know this, but Anna, my wife, her core training as a therapist was in eating disorders.
I did not know that.
And so she worked in outpatient residential eating disorders. So this was teenagers who were discharged directly from the hospital because they were near death. And we're at that state of either binging or extreme anorexia or bulimia. And I think it is actually one of the most challenging areas of addiction because there's no avoiding it.
Yeah.
Like, you're like restricting what you eat, or you're sneaking and eating too much, or whatever it is. Like, it is nefarious, and there's no hiding from it, right? And I think it's of diagnosable mental health disorders for teenagers, I think it's the leading cause of death. It's the
eating disorders are?
Yeah. It has scary rates of impact.
Yeah.
So, but I think what I'm getting to is the medical profession and the institution around that, I think, is a very powerful example of it's a system we have in society to give people this like direct guidance. There's a lot of economic flow through the health insurance
Yep.
system,
Yep.
through pharmaceuticals to try and do what the system is trying to do.
Yeah.
I think religious institutions are another example of institution. I think school lunches,
Yes.
where kids are going to spend their days and learn, everything from how to play on the playground to healthy eating. And so looking at it through the institutional lens and then echoing that back in the personal is, I think, how you get long-term kind of decadal change that we need. And this is one of those things that we put it on the person and not the community so much. We put it on the person and not the grocery store. So how do you get the Safeways to work with the medical institutions, to work with the school, and think about it as a holistic conversation around, and maybe a new identity label per the Hindi point to say, hey, you know what? I am a blah. What does
Right.
that mean?
Right.
I don't need ultra processed stuff anymore. And
Right.
you're going to help me because when I go to the doctor's office, they have me check a box.
Right.
That says I'm a blah.
Or I'm going to save money because I'm a
I'm going
blah.
to save
Or
money
gonna-
because I'm a
and-
blah. Or
yeah,
whatever it is. I'm fascinated by this interplay between
That's
all these
really
things.
fascinating. Well, one of the things that you said that I resonated with me is the carbon footprint piece made by the oil companies, which blows my mind. And they reframed it, right? It's a marketing gimmick, so they don't take the onus. Well, let me tell you what happened. I went to the doctor 50 pounds ago, and he told me that I was morbidly obese. I had, at that time, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and you have kids, and that's scary. That's like being like, you're not going to see your kids graduate, right? So there's my wake-up call. There's a moment. And I kind of started to cry to him. And I'm like, I'm a chef. And you just mentioned, gosh, like, we have to do this all the time. And if you live across the street from a grocery store, that's like being a gambling. Okay. So I told him, Doc, I'm a chef.
I work in the casino.
I work in the casino and I'm a gambling, it's like being an alcoholic and being a bartender. And I'm like, and I have to do this, to your point. Like, I have to eat. And I'm sitting there crying and kind of yelling at him, and he's just being silent. And he turned around and he kind of said, Joel, you are the solve. He's like, you have the knowledge and the tools to make a Brussels sprout, a broccoli, a piece of fish. These things be satiating, be accessible, be possible. You have the opposite. You have the least amount of excuses out of everyone. You know how to do this. And that moment is when I'm like, I think I'm going to dedicate my life to not just doing it for myself. I got to learn it for myself first, but then help other people. And I want to sit here and say, the first thing to learning about this is admitting that I have this problem too. We all have this problem. It's no one's fault. It's not, you shouldn't feel sad about it. It's the way that our society is. But I do think there needs to be a personal ownership. And of course, I just don't believe America works in this place where the institution talks to the grocery store, which talks to the school. We kind of have to take this one. Like my doctor had to say, Joel, it's no one else, man. It's you.
Yeah.
And it's like, you got to dig in. And it's like, the reality is, if you want your kids to eat healthy, if you don't want to be addicted to the stuff, you don't want to be a statistic, this is on you. We can create the tools, we can create the space, and it will be ready for you. But like, something's got to drive you to go. That's my personal story. And I do think that I had a wake-up call, and I hope that people don't have scary wake-up calls like that. But I do think that, like, without having a life-threatening wake-up call, people are starting to get into it. And like, you're seeing these nutritionists on Instagram just, oh my God, hit. I'm seeing all these just whole food talks. Processed foods are the new cigarettes. And I love it. And I'm all about it. And I am on a mission to just eradicate it.
It's humming. So I think we'd be remiss in 2024 to talk about all of that at the medical establishment and not talk about Ozempic.
Let's talk about it.
I mean, I think there's a belief, and I haven't looked at the latest data on this, that that's going to be a big part of the story.
Yeah.
And is going to change markets because people's behaviors are going to shift here. And if to the extent that, we're not creatures made for this modern grocery store casino, but if we give you this, you're not going to really want to spend the time in the casino. So like, where are you at in thinking through how to weave that in and where it sits?
So first of all, I was on Ozempic, I was on Mounjaro, and I was on Zepbound. I did them all, guys. I did the whole buffet. That was part of the first step of my doctor giving me this advice. So the first thing it does to you just personally is it shuts down your want to eat, which to me shuts down my passion for life in some ways. Like, it's
turns off your glue. It's like your glue is not sticky anymore.
Yeah, it is. It's a very interesting, it's like relearning myself. By the way, I'm off of it. And I'll tell you, like, I'm off of it because I had really bad side effects. It was bad for me. And I realized you can't just take a shot and eat chips. You have to take a shot and you still have to eat well. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And so, to me, I like this drug. This is going to be so controversial. I think drugs are important. I don't think we'd live as long as we did without penicillin. And like,
I mean, our babies are born.
Yes.
At least mine was born in the hospital. All
Yes.
three of mine. And the first thing that happens is stop them from dying because they used to really die very often. And in some places of the world, they don't get vitamin K immediately, and things happen. And so we're very lucky, that we have figured some of these things out.
Yes, 100%. So I am not an anti-vax, anti-drug. I am for it. I think it's important. I think it needs to be paired and surrounded by nutrition, and it needs to be surrounded by education. And so that is my stance on it. I think that if you want to go down like what's going to happen economically, business-wise, the reality is I think that the world is going to be a lot trimmer, a lot healthier. I think it's going to change the types of cravings because I know it does. I think you're going to see things like you can't eat super oily foods on these things. It makes you super nauseous. We crave that now when you're off these drugs. You're going to see less of that. You're going to see smaller portion sizes. You're going to see so many different things of a trickle-down effect. I think the biggest thing from like a business side is like there needs to be a solve for people to get off of it. There is no solve right now to get off of it. So a deprescription solve, and that's kind of the space that I'm like getting into, but like you can't, I mean, you could be on it forever, but right now it's super expensive. And I don't think people want to be on like, I think eventually people, once they reach a goal weight, they're like, cool, I'm here. How do I sustain this without shooting myself in the stomach every week? I think we all want that. It's like, I want to get off medicine if I could get off medicine. But if it gets me to a certain level, I'm all for it. What is your take?
I think I agree with 100% of everything you said. I think there's also this interesting dance that's happening around like people's level of openness about their experiences with it. And so it all feels
it's a stigma thing.
Yeah. And I think it all feels very, very early days on that. But I mean, big picture, I'm like a pro-progress person.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's a bunch of people who I love that I think if it helps them live longer and live a more fulfilling life while they're living, like I want that for them, right? Yeah. And so
what is with the stigma of it? What do you think that is?
I think it's connected to the personal willpower bootstrap American story, which is you're supposed to be thin and beautiful and healthy and wealthy all because you earned it yourself is the societal American lie. And so all of a sudden when there's like a shortcut in quotes, I'm putting quotes up, people are like, well, they didn't work for that. That's kind of unfair. And then, I mean, I think there are real present tense issues on access, right? And I think in your scenario, you were in a medical category where things might be very different, but I think that in general...
No, I paid out of pocket for it. And I was lucky enough to be able to afford that.
That's right.
And like,
so I think that's a real issue around it, which is, hey, you're doing this, but this is like a very limited access thing right now. So maybe it'll change when it's, I don't know, when it's more accessible.
It's definitely going to become more accessible and it's going to become important. But I agree with everything that you just said. And I think that I do think it's a miracle drug. Personally, I'm calling it out. If there is a drug that can keep alcoholics from being alcoholics or people who want to commit suicide from committing suicide, I don't think we'd look at it as like a shortcoming. Right. I think we'd look at it as like a medical, just unbelievable advancement. So I hope that people look at it as not like a crutch, but as like, thank God we have this. It's going to extend lives. Your loved ones, you're going to have that much more time with them. I think there's so much about the human brain we just don't understand that this solves for. It's the most thing I felt about it was not a physical in my stomach thing. It was a mental thing.
Yeah, this your life.
The shutdown of that.
We talked through how your life wove through with food. And does this connect or not with your sister and her relationship to food?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was so my sister died from a drug overdose, and short of it is, and she died just a couple of years ago. She's my best friend. I love her. And she was morbidly obese in middle school. She was probably 300 pounds in middle school, like in like 6th or 7th grade. She was the fat girl. She had all the cute friends that I had crushes on the entire time. She was the total center of attention because she had to be, because when you're that big, you have to be the goofy one. You have to be the whatever. And everyone loved her. And still does love her. And she's the type of person, not just because physically, but just she just when she left the room, you felt it.
Yeah.
It's one of those people.
Yeah.
And she got a gastric sleeve in high school, which for those of you guys who don't know means they basically like turn a sleeve into your stomach, and it's a much smaller stomach, so you can't overeat. And like almost like 2 months later, you lose like 80 pounds.
Yeah.
So you go from like being the fat person to being the really, really, really skinny person. And she was super skinny. And I'll tell you, it was interesting to see the mental shift. How do you go from the person that didn't have any attention to one that's now getting attention, that you never got asked to the dance, but now you're getting asked to the dance? And you never got to shop in the normal shops, but now you get to. It's like really confusing and hard. And like, I think there's a similarity here with what we're seeing with this drug and this time. It's like, it's so mental and it's so hard to navigate by yourself. And we need help. I don't know the answer. I'm trying to figure out the answer, but like, she's a big reason why I think I'm called to this. And it's being obese is a total mind. I can't know if I swear on this podcast, but it's a mind fuck. And it's confusing and hard. And like one of the things that used to be stigmatized is mental health, which now, I'll say this, I've got a therapist. And by the way, if I said that 10 years ago, I think people would be like, he must be depressed.
Yeah.
Everyone I know in the world has a therapist now. In Brazil and in Portugal, guess what they all have? Nutritionists.
Yeah.
It's very normal in that culture to have a nutritionist. And you know what? I don't know why it's not normal here. So I see a nutritionist now. I talked to him this morning. His name is Matt. And he helps me with my relationship to food. I need that help. I need a solve. So I think just like we need help sometimes in our relationships to ourselves and to our careers, to our loved ones, I don't think the world's going to get any easier in terms of food, but I do think that we can get more inspired, more educated, more excited. I think you'll see more businesses in this space. You'll see more innovation in this space. And I couldn't be more excited. I think we're on the precipice and like the crest of a really big wave. And for the first time, I think in modern history, you would know this more than I would, Ben, but like our life expectancy is lowering. Like we're going the opposite direction until this year. Like it's starting to kind of turn a little bit. And that to me is like the crest. Something's changing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, this is a climate podcast, so I want to bring it back to climate here as we get close to the end. But how could we take care of the earth if we don't take care of ourselves? I'm just going to like mic drop there. Like anything you talk about, anyone you talk about on this podcast, if they're not healthy, any solution out there, if they're not run by healthy people, if someone is not healthy, they're not going to be able to think of a solve of how to help get our climate in a better place. If we are not healthy, we can't be good dads. We can't be good partners. We can't be good businessmen. We can't do anything. If you're in a hospital, right, the best thing we can do for the earth is to take care of ourselves, period. And as a country, the biggest killer is heart disease, cancer, diabetes. I can list them in the top 10 killers. 6 of them are avoidable by changing the way we eat. So if there's anything that I could say is good for the planet, it's the thing that we do 21 times a week, which is what are we putting on our bodies?
Okay. I'm hyped up. I agree.
Hyped up. Let's get you an apple.
Well, I'm pumped up.
Okay.
I just want more Joel at this point.
You want more Joel?
I want more Joel.
Okay.
This is not enough.
Okay. Go to homemadecooking.com and sign up for a free class and come cook with me in the kitchen.
No
matter where you are in the world. It's all online. 2, follow me on Instagram at Joel Gamoran. That's it. There's no .com there. And the last thing I would say is don't get hooked in with me. Get hooked in with your body. And, it's Michael Pollan said this, but he said, eat more whole foods, lots of vegetables, and not too much.
Yep.
And if we can do those things, you'll be in a good spot. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Joel. Thank you for
Thanks
being
for having
the
me,
glue.
Ben.
This was lovely. Well, that's a wrap on episode 22 of Climate Papa. I'm releasing this in the holiday season, and I hope all of you are getting some quality time with your loved ones as we close out 2024 and look ahead to 2025. We did our first big travel as a family of 5 and made it back home in one piece, and the kids actually all traveled great, so I'm feeling extra thankful for that. If you enjoyed this episode and want more, please subscribe or follow in the podcast player of your choice or directly via climatepapa.com, and we'll send you an email when the next episode comes out. On that note, I've been working on a deep dive on some climate infrastructure topics, and the first episode in that series is queued up next. I cannot wait to share it with you. And with that, Happy New Year, and here's the Balkan Bump remix of Mellow Kind of Hype by Lazy Syrup Orchestra, as usual, to take us out.
On we go like